Began this morning with the change over from the Biden administration to the second Trump administration in Washington, D.C. It has been a busy first week of the Trump presidency. On the first day alone, more than 24 executive orders were signed. So far, we've seen changes to policies around trade, immigration, foreign aid, diversity initiatives, civil rights, and the hiring of federal workers. The impact of each action varies, with some coming off as symbolic, some having an immediate effect, and some wrapped up in the courts. Over the past week, Congress has been in the process of passing the Riley Act, an immigration detention bill that is President Trump's first major legislative win.
What the world has witnessed in the past 72 hours is nothing less than a revolution of common sense. Our country will soon be stronger, wealthier, and more united than ever before, and the entire planet will be more peaceful and prosperous as a result of this incredible momentum and what we're doing and going to do.
And those are remarks that he shared earlier this week at the World Economic Forum meeting in Switzerland. So, Representative Lockett, this is your inaugural show. I want to start with you here, considering we're talking about, your party leader now. I mean, first impressions from this first week, how are you feeling as a Republican?
I'm feeling great. And I think as we see, I think Trump was elected on a mandate, especially here in our state, across the country as well. And I think he's delivering on the promises that he made. I'm glad to see that he is doing what he said that he was going to do. I think all of these policies are going to be good for our country.
Senator Webb, you represent a rural part of the state. There's a good mix of Democrats and Republicans there. Thoughts from your perspective?
It's a lot of energy, flurry of activity. I was in D.C. Friday, and a lot of energy then, and it's carried forth, and I think we're all trying to digest the actual content of what's going on. We know the premise, but the details are in the wording of the order, and I think we're all trying to digest all that. Given
the policies that we're seeing being implemented so far, and you all lawmakers, that this process takes a bit of time, we're starting to see things, affect things that are on the national conversation. We heard a lot about immigration during the election, but what about the issues you think are going to have the greatest impact in Kentucky? When we start really getting deep into the policy, how are those going to trickle down and affect average Kentuckians?
I think really probably one of the first things we'll see, probably immigration is a big issue as well here in the state, DEI policies, and our economy. Our economy is recovering from one of the worst 4 years that we've had in history. And I think if Trump can begin to, and the policies coming out of Congress alike, can really begin to turn that around, that's what's going to impact Kentuckians. When we begin to see policies that impact our pocketbooks, our jobs, that's what Kentuckians want. And I think that's what we're going to see.
What are the policies you think could happen?
Well, Congress has struggled with immigration policy for a number of years, so I think we need an immigration policy. So I'm all for something. Some of that will be dealt with in the courts, and some of these other issues certainly will be as well. The constitutionalists and the legislative branch in me kind of trumps any partisan politics, no pun intended, but certainly. I think there's going to be some limitations on some of the actions just constitutionally, and the courts are going to try to rein some of it in. But I think we need an immigration policy, and I hope this is the impetus that Congress comes together on.
Since you bring up the courts potentially stepping on some of those things, there's been a lot of different executive orders used, and that's been a practice that presidents of both parties have done whenever they've first taken office. Any thoughts about the use, or even if you would see them as an overuse of executive orders so far as we've started this administration?
Well, the executive prerogative certainly is to be acknowledged. But I think it does need to be deliberative and thoughtful, and I think they've given some of these some thought. But again, you don't want to usurp the congressional authority, and people they're duly elected by that level of constituency, and I think there's got to be a balance. And I think you'll see more of interaction between that. But because these things, immigration is going to affect our workforce here in Kentucky. There's no question, whether it's agriculture, the horse industry, or whatever. Some of these policies could really, we're struggling now with workforce issues. I've been on a task force trying to deal with workforce issues with Senator Wise, and that's my fear of the extreme.
What are your thoughts there, Representative Lockett?
I would agree. I mean, I think they're important. I think it is their prerogative to do that, but I also think that you have to balance the fact that Congress is there for a reason constitutionally. It is their job to make economic policy and so forth. And so I think With a careful eye. I think the president obviously has the right to do that, but it's also wise to have Congress involved there as well. And I think one of the things that we're going to see too, you know, there's a discussion of tariffs, and I think tariffs would mean a huge issue to Kentucky, whether it's our bourbon industry, whether it's the horse industry, whether it's, you know, exporting goods. But that's something too that as we as Kentuckians and as our General Assembly look to our policies, we kind of have to keep that in mind and say, how is this going to affect Kentucky if in fact they do come about?
Is it something that is giving some Republicans pause in the state?
I wouldn't say it's pause. I think it's more, I think the president is using them as a bargaining chip, if you will, at this point. I don't think he's above doing them or putting them in place. But I think, especially with countries like China and so forth, I think it's a tool to use. But if they are in place, I think it's something that we, of course, want our prices to remain the lowest that they can.
All right.
The infrastructure rollback concerns me on impacts on county and local budgets. The infrastructure, you know, to cease two of the federal acts that have funded infrastructure. Some of these projects are already in the budgets, and just to slow walk those payments could be detrimental to not only development of infrastructure, but for those budgets that are dependent on that.
We'll find out over the next 4 years. We'll have to leave it there.